Lesson Introduction. The preparation phase of incident response identifies data sources that can support investigations. It also provisions tools to aggregate and correlate this data and partially automate its analysis to drive an alerting and monitoring system. While automated detection is a huge support for the security team, it cannot identify all indicators of malicious activity. As an incident responder, you must be able to identify signs in data sources that point to a particular type of attack. Lesson objectives. In this lesson, you will do the following. Analyze indicators of malicious activity in malware, physical, network, and application attacks. Rate your confidence. Exam objectives covered. 2.4 Given a scenario, analyze indicators of malicious activity. By classifying the various types of malware and identifying the signs of infection, security teams are better prepared to remediate compromised systems or prevent malware from executing in the first place. Rate malware classification. Many of the intrusion attempts perpetrated against computer networks depend on the use of malicious software or malware. Malware is simply defined as software that does something bad from the perspective of the system owner. A complicating factor with malware classification is the degree to which its installation is expected or tolerated by the user. Some malware classifications, such as Trojan, virus, and worm, focus on the vector used by the malware. The vector is the method by which the malware executes on a computer and potentially spreads to other network hosts. The following categories describe some types of malware according to vector. Viruses and worms represent some of the first types of malware and spread without any authorization from the user by being concealed within the executable code of another process. These processes are described as being infected with malware. Trojan refers to malware concealed within an installer package for software that appears to be legitimate. This type of malware does not seek any type of consent for installation and is actively designed to operate secretly. Potentially unwanted programs, PUPs/potentially unwanted applications, PUAs, are software installed alongside a package selected by the user or perhaps bundled with a new computer system. Unlike a Trojan, the presence of a PUP is not automatically regarded as malicious. It may have been installed without active consent or with consent from a purposefully confusing license agreement. This type of software is sometimes described as grayware rather than malware. It can also be referred to as bloatware. Malware classification by vector. Other classifications are based on the payload delivered by the malware. The payload is an action performed by the malware other than simply replicating or persisting on a host. Examples of payload classifications include spyware, rootkit, remote access Trojan, rat, and ransomware. Rate your confidence. Computer viruses. A computer virus is a type of malware designed to replicate and spread from computer to computer, usually by infecting executable applications or program code. There are several different types of viruses, and they're generally classified by the different types of file or media that they infect. Non-resident/file infector. The virus is contained within a host executable file and runs with the host process. The virus will try to infect other process images on persistent storage and perform other payload actions. It then passes control back to the host program. Memory resident. When the host file is executed, the virus creates a new process for itself in memory. The malicious process remains in memory, even if the host process is terminated. Boot. The virus code is written to the disk boot sector or the partition table of a fixed disk or USB media and executes as a memory resident process when the OS starts or the media is attached to the computer. Script and macro viruses. The malware uses the programming features available in local scripting engines for the OS and/or browser, such as PowerShell, Windows Management Instrumentation, WMI, JavaScript, Microsoft Office documents with Visual Basic for applications, VBA, code enabled, or PDF documents with JavaScript enabled. In addition, the term multipartite is used for viruses that use multiple vectors, and the term polymorphic is used for viruses that can dynamically change or obfuscate their code to evade detection. What these types of viruses have in common is that they must infect a host file or media. An infected file can be distributed through any normal means, on a disk, on a network, as an attachment to an email or social media post, or as a download from a website.
Description.
The message at the top reads, "Links and other functionality have been disabled in this message." To turn on that functionality, move this message to the inbox. This message was marked as spam using a junk filter other than the Outlook junk email filter. We converted this message into plain text format. Outlook blocked access to the following potentially unsafe attachments: docs_2017824007_095451_ jar. A message is followed by an email. Unsafe attachment detected by Outlook's mail filter. The double file extension is an unsophisticated attempt to fool any user not already alerted by the use of both English and Dutch in the message text. Screenshot used with permission from Microsoft. Rate your confidence. Continue. Computer worms and fileless malware. A computer worm is memory-resident malware that can run without user intervention and replicate over network resources. A virus is executed only when the user performs an action such as downloading and running an infected executable process, attaching an infected USB stick, or opening an infected document with macros or scripting enabled. By contrast, a worm can execute by exploiting a vulnerability in a process when the user browses a website, runs a vulnerable server application, or is connected to an infected file share. For example, the Code Red worm was able to infect early versions of Microsoft's IIS web server software via a buffer overflow vulnerability. It then scanned randomly generated IP ranges to try to infect other vulnerable IIS servers. The primary effect of the first types of computer worm is to rapidly consume network bandwidth as the worm replicates. A worm may also be able to crash an operating system or a server application, performing a denial of service attack. Also, like viruses, worms can carry a payload that can be written to perform any type of malicious action. The Configure worm illustrated the potential for remote code execution and memory-resident malware to effect highly potent attacks. As malware has continued to be developed for criminal intent and security software became better able to detect and block static threats, malware code and techniques have become more sophisticated. The term fileless has gained prominence to refer to these modern types of malware. Fileless is not a definitive classification, but it describes a collection of common behaviors and techniques. Fileless malware does not write its code to disk. The malware uses memory-resident techniques to run in its own process, within a host process or dynamic link library, DLL, or within a scripting host. This does not mean that there is no disk activity at all, however. The malware may change registry values to achieve persistence, executing if the host computer is restarted. The initial execution of the malware may also depend on the user running a downloaded script, file attachment, or Trojan software package. Fileless malware uses lightweight shellcode to achieve a backdoor mechanism on the host. The shellcode is easy to recompile in an obfuscated form to evade detection by scanners. It is then able to download additional packages or payloads to achieve the threat actor's objectives. These packages can also be obfuscated, streamed, and compiled on the fly to evade automated detection. Fileless malware may use live off the land techniques rather than compiled executables to evade detection. This means that the malware code uses legitimate system scripting tools, notably PowerShell and Windows Management Instrumentation, WMI, to execute payload actions. If they can be executed with sufficient permissions, these environments provide all the tools the attacker needs to perform scanning, reconfigure settings, and exfiltrate data. The terms Advanced Persistent Threat, APT, and Advanced Volatile Threat, AVT, can be used to describe this general class of modern fileless/live off-the-land malware. Another useful classification is Low Observable Characteristics, LOC, attack. The exact classification is less important than the realization that adversaries can use any variety of coding tricks to effect intrusions and that their tactics, techniques, and procedures to evade detection are continually evolving. Rate your confidence. Spyware and keyloggers. The first viruses and worms focused on the destructive potential of being able to replicate. As the profitable uses of this software became apparent, however, they started to be coded with payloads designed to facilitate intrusion, fraud, and data theft. Bloatware and malware can be used for different levels of monitoring. Tracking cookies. A cookie is a plaintext file, not malware, but if permitted by browser settings, third-party cookies can be used to record web activity, track the user's IP address, and harvest various other metadata, such as search queries and information about the browser software and configuration. Tracking cookies are created by adverts and analytics widgets embedded into many websites. Supercookies and beacons. As browser software gives the user some control over what cookies to accept, web marketing companies have come up with alternative ways to implement tracking that are difficult to disable. A supercookie is a means of storing tracking data in a non-regular way, such as saving it to cache without declaring the data to be a cookie or encoding data into header requests. A beacon is a single pixel image embedded into a website. While invisible to the user, the browser must make a request to download the pixel to load the site, giving the beacon host the opportunity to collect metadata, perform browser fingerprinting, and potentially run tracking scripts. Adware. This is a class of PUP/bloatware that performs browser reconfigurations, such as allowing tracking cookies, changing default search providers, opening sponsors pages at startup, adding bookmarks, and so on. Adware may be installed as a program or as a browser extension/plugin. Spyware. This is malware that can perform adware-like tracking, but also monitor local application activity, take screenshots, and activate recording devices, such as a microphone or webcam. Another spyware technique is to perform DNS redirection to farming sites. Keylogger. This is spyware that actively attempts to steal confidential information by recording keystrokes. The attacker will usually hope to discover passwords or credit card data. Using the Metasploit Meterpreter remote access tool to dump keystrokes from the victim machine, revealing the password used to access a web app. Keyloggers are not only implemented as software. A malicious script can transmit key presses to a third-party website. There are also hardware devices to capture key presses to a modified USB adapter inserted between the keyboard and the port. Such devices can store data locally or come with Wi-Fi connectivity to send data to a covert access point. Other attacks include wireless sniffers to record key press data, overlay ATM pin pads, and so on. Rate your confidence.
Continue. Category.
Topic 13A. Malware. Backdoors and remote access Trojans. Any type of access method to a host that circumvents the usual authentication method and gives the remote user administrative control can be referred to as a backdoor. A remote access Trojan, RAT, is backdoor malware that mimics the functionality of legitimate remote control programs, but is designed specifically to operate covertly. Once the RAT is installed, it allows the threat actor to access the host, upload files, and install software or use live off the land techniques to effect further compromises. In this context, RAT can also stand for Remote Administration Tool. A host that is under malicious control is sometimes described as a zombie. A compromised host can be installed with one or more bots. A bot is an automated script or tool that performs some malicious activity. A group of bots that are all under the control of the same malware instance can be manipulated as a botnet by the herder program. A botnet can be used for many types of malicious purpose, including triggering distributed denial of service, DDoS, attacks, launching spam campaigns, or performing cryptomining.
Description.
The screen shows an expand button named Connection selected to list hyperlinks for IP Scanner, Get PC Info, Get Home Info, Server Options, Selected, and IP Notify. The buttons on the right are Change Port, Set Default Port, set password, remove password, disconnect victim, restart server, remove server, close server, update server from local file, and update server from URL file. The other expand buttons on the bottom left are keys or messages, advanced, miscellaneous, fun manager, extra fun, and local options.
Sub 7 Rat.
Screenshot used with permission from Wikimedia Commons by CCS 4.0 International. Whether a backdoor is used as a standalone intrusion mechanism or to manage bots, the threat actor must establish a connection from the compromised host to a command and control, C2 or CNC, host or network. This network connection is usually the best way to identify the presence of a RAT, backdoor, or bot. There are many means of implementing a CNC network as a covert channel to evade detection and filtering. Historically, the Internet Relay Chat, IRC, protocol was popular. Modern methods are more likely to use command sequences embedded in HTTPS or DNS traffic. Backdoors can be created in other ways than by infection by malware. Programmers may create backdoors in software applications for testing and development that are subsequently not removed when the application is deployed. Backdoors are also created by misconfiguration of software or hardware that allows access to unauthorized users. Rate your confidence.
Continue.
Rootkits. In Windows, Trojan malware that depends on manual execution by the logged-on user inherits the privileges of that user account. If the account has only standard permissions, the malware will only be able to add, change, or delete files in the user's profile and to run only apps and commands that the user is permitted to. If the malware attempts to change system-wide files or settings, it requires local administrator-level privileges. To obtain those through manual installation or execution, the user must be confident enough in the Trojan package to confirm the user account control, UAC, prompt, or enter the credentials for an administrative user. If the malware gains local administrator-level privileges, there are still protections in Windows to mitigate abuse of these permissions. Critical processes run with a higher level of privilege called system. Consequently, Trojans installed or executed with local administrator privileges cannot conceal their presence entirely and will show up as a running process or service. Often the process image name is configured to resemble a genuine executable or library to avoid detection. For example, a Trojan may use the file name rund1132.exe to masquerade as rundle32.exe. To ensure persistence, running when the computer is restarted, the Trojan may have to use a registry entry or create itself as a service, which can usually be detected easily. If the malware can be delivered as the payload for an exploit of a severe vulnerability, it may be able to execute without requiring any authorization using system privileges. Alternatively, the malware may be able to use an exploit to escalate privileges to system level after installation. Malware running with this level of privilege is referred to as a rootkit. The term derives from Unix/Linux, where any process running as the root superuser account has unrestricted access to everything from the root of the file system down. In theory, there is nothing about the system that a rootkit could not change. In practice, Windows uses other mechanisms to prevent misuse of kernel processes, such as code signing. Consequently, what a rootkit can do depends largely on adversary capability and level of effort. When dealing with a rootkit, you should be aware that there is the possibility that it can compromise system files and programming interfaces so that local shell processes such as Explorer, Tasker, or Tasklist on Windows or PS or Top on Linux, plus port scanning tools such as Netstat no longer reveal its presence, at least if run from the infected machine. A rootkit may also contain tools for cleaning system logs, further concealing its presence. Software processes can run in one of several rings. Ring 0 is the most privileged. It provides direct access to hardware, and so should be reserved for kernel processes only. Ring 3 is where user mode processes run. Drivers and I/O processes may run in Ring 1 or Ring 2. This architecture can also be complicated by the use of virtualization. There are also examples of rootkits that can reside in firmware, either the computer firmware or the firmware of any sort of adapter card, hard drive, removable drive, or peripheral device. These can survive any attempt to remove the rootkit by formatting the drive and reinstalling the OS. For example, the US intelligence agencies have developed dark matter and quark matter UEFI rootkits targeting the firmware on Apple MacBook laptops. Rate your ransomware, crypto malware, and logic bombs. Ransomware is a type of malware that tries to extort money from the victim by making the victim's computer and/or data files unavailable and demanding payment. One class of ransomware will display threatening messages, such as requiring Windows to be reactivated or suggesting that the computer has been locked by the police because it was used to view child pornography or for terrorism. This may apparently block access to the file system by installing a different shell program. Ransomware uses payment methods, such as wire transfer, cryptocurrency, or premium rate phone lines, to allow the attacker to extort money without revealing their identity or being traced by local law enforcement.
Description.
A message at the top reads, "Oops, your files have been encrypted." The text below answers the questions, "What happened to my computer? Can I recover my files? And how do I pay?" The left side has the date and time on which the payment will be raised and on which the files will be lost. Text at the bottom reads, "Bitcoin accepted here. Send $300 worth of Bitcoin to this address." A link with copy button is present. Check payment and decrypt buttons are at the bottom. WannaCry ransomware. Image by Wikimedia Commons. Scareware refers to malware that displays alarming messages, often disguised to look like genuine OS alert boxes. Scareware attempts to alarm a user by suggesting that the computer is infected or has been hijacked. Crypto ransomware. The crypto class of ransomware attempts to encrypt data files on any fixed, removable, and network drives. If the attack is successful, the user will be unable to access the files without obtaining the private encryption key, which is held by the attacker. If successful, this sort of attack is extremely difficult to mitigate unless the user has backups of the encrypted files. One example of crypto ransomware is CryptoLocker, a Trojan that searches for files to encrypt and then prompts the victim to pay a sum of money before a certain countdown time, after which the malware destroys the key that allows the decryption. Cryptojacking malware. Another type of crypto malware hijacks the resources of the host to perform cryptocurrency mining. This is referred to as crypto mining, and malware that performs crypto mining maliciously is classed as cryptojacking. The total number of coins within a cryptocurrency is limited by the difficulty of performing the calculations necessary to mint a new digital coin. Consequently, new coins can be very valuable, but it takes enormous computing resources to discover them. Cryptojacking is often performed across botnets. Logic bombs. Some types of malware do not trigger automatically. Having infected a system, they wait for a preconfigured time or date, time bomb, or a system or user event, logic bomb. A logic bomb isn't necessarily malicious code, but could be an event that triggers an undesirable event. A typical example is a disgruntled systems administrator who leaves a scripted trap that runs in the event their account is deleted or disabled. Antivirus software is unlikely to detect this kind of malicious script or program. This type of trap is also referred to as a mine. Rate your confidence. TTPs and IOCS. Antivirus, AV, scanners work on the basis of recognizing known malware code. The malware code is stored as a signature in the antivirus scanner's database. The database of signatures must be continually updated. When a file is accessed, the AV intercepts the call and scans the file. If it matches any of its signatures, it blocks access to the file and alerts the user and logs the event. This type of signature-based detection is still important for detecting commodity malware attacks, but it is no longer wholly effective. Malicious activity can often only be detected by monitoring for a wider range of indicators. Knowledge of these indicators is formed by studying threat actor behaviors. The outcome of this analysis is described as a tactic, technique, or procedure, TTP. Tactic, high-level description of a threat behavior. Behaviors such as reconnaissance, persistence, and privilege escalation are examples of tactics. Technique: intermediate level description of how a threat actor progresses a tactic. For example, reconnaissance might be accomplished via techniques such as active network scanning, vulnerability scanning, and email harvesting. Procedure: detailed description of how a technique is performed. For example, a particular threat actor might use a particular tool in a distinctive way to perform vulnerability scanning. As an example of TTP analysis, consider the scenario where a criminal gang seeks to blackmail companies by infecting hosts with ransomware. This is the threat actor's goal. To achieve the goal, they deploy a campaign comprising a number of tactics such as reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, and execution. Within the initial access tactic, the gang might have developed a novel technique to exploit a vulnerability in some network monitoring software used by a wide range of companies. Analysis of procedures reveals exactly how the exploited software is installed on company networks through an infected repository. This enables the gang's next tactic: execution of malware. An indicator of compromise, IOC, is a residual sign that an asset or network has been successfully attacked or is continuing to be attacked. Put another way, an IOC is evidence of a TTP. In the scenario above, IOCS could include the presence of the compromised network monitor process version, connections to the command and control (CNC) network, disabled system recovery/backup features, registry entries, and script remnants to execute the ransomware, files made inaccessible through encryption with different file extensions, and blackmail demand notices. As there are many different targets and vectors of an attack, there are also thousands of potential IOCS. Many TTPs and IOCS are well known. They are documented and published by threat researchers. One of the best-known examples is the MITRE ATT and CK database attack, MITRE.org. Modern scanning tools are usually integrated with threat feeds of published TTPs and indicators. This allows for automated scanning of malicious behaviors, rather than just signature-based malware detection. An IOC can be definite and objectively identifiable, like a malware signature, but often IOCS can only be described with confidence via the correlation of many data points. Because these IOCS are often identified through patterns of anomalous activity rather than single events, they can be open to interpretation and therefore slow to diagnose. Consequently, threat intelligence platforms use artificial intelligence, AI, systems to perform automated analysis. These systems underpin the detection and response features of modern threat protection suites. Strictly speaking, an IOC is evidence of an attack that was successful. The term indicator of attack, IMA, is sometimes also used for evidence of an intrusion attempt in progress. Rate your confidence. Malicious activity indicators. Given the range of malware types, there are many potential indicators of malicious activity. Some types of malware display obvious changes, such as adjusting browser settings or displaying ransom notices. If malware is designed to operate covertly, indicators can require detailed analysis of process, file system, and network behavior. Sandbox execution. If malicious activity is not detected by endpoint protection, analyze the suspect code or host in a sandboxed environment. A sandbox is a system configured to be completely isolated from the production network so that the malware cannot break out. The sandbox will be designed to record file system and registry changes plus network activity. Similarly, a sheep dip is an isolated host used to test new software and removable media for malware indicators before it is authorized on the production network. Resource consumption. Abnormal resource consumption can be detected using a performance monitor. Indicators such as excessive and continuous CPU usage, memory leaks, disk read/write activity, disk space usage, and network bandwidth consumption can be signs of malware. Resource consumption could be a reason to investigate a system rather than definitive proof of malicious activity. These symptoms can also be caused by many other performance and system stability issues. Also, it is only poorly written malware or malware that performs intensive operations that displays this behavior. For example, it is the nature of botnet DDoS, cryptojacking, and crypto ransomware to hijack the computer's resources. Windows Performance Monitor recording CPU utilization on a client PC. Anomalous activity is difficult to diagnose, but this graph shows load rarely dropping below 50%. Continual load is not typical of a client system and could be an indicator of cryptojacking malware. Screenshot used with permission from Microsoft. File system. Malicious code might not execute from a process image saved on a local disk, but it is still likely to interact with the file system and registry, revealing its presence by behavior. A computer's file system stores a great deal of useful metadata about when files were created, accessed, or modified. Analyzing these metadata and checking for suspicious temporary files can help to establish a timeline of events for an incident that has left traces on a host and its files. Attempts to access valuable data can be revealed by blocked content indicators. Where files are simply protected by ACLs, if auditing is configured, an access denied message will be logged if a user account attempts to read or modify a file it does not have permission to access. Information might also be protected by a data loss prevention (DLP) system, which will also log blocked content events. Resource inaccessibility. Resource inaccessibility means that a network, host, file, or database is not available. This is typically an indicator of a denial of service (DOS) attack. Host and network gateways might be unavailable due to excessive resource consumption. A network attack will often create large numbers of connections. Data resources might be subject to ransomware attack. Additionally, malware might disable scanning and monitoring utilities to evade detection. Account compromise. A threat actor will often try to exploit an existing account to achieve objectives. The following indicators can reveal suspicious account behavior. Account lockout. The system has prevented access to the account because too many failed authentication attempts have been made. Lockout could also mean that the user's password no longer works because the threat actor has changed it. Concurrent session usage. This indicates that the threat actor has obtained the account credentials and is signed in on another workstation or over a remote access connection. Impossible travel. This indicates that the threat actor is attempting to use remote access to sign into an account from a geographic location that they would not have physically been able to move to in the time since their last sign-in. Logging. A threat actor will often try to cover their tracks by removing indicators from log files. Missing logs. This could mean that the log file has been deleted. As this is easy to detect, a more sophisticated threat actor will remove log entries. This might be indicated by unusual gaps between log entry times. The most sophisticated type of attack will spoof log entries to conceal the malicious activity. Out-of-cycle logging. A threat actor might also manipulate the system time or change log entry timestamps as a means of hiding activity. Rate your confidence. Exam objectives covered. 2.4 Given a scenario, analyze indicators of malicious activity. Company sites and offices and their networks present a wide attack surface for threat actors to target. Understanding how denial of service, on-path, and credential-based attacks are perpetrated and being able to diagnose their indicators from appropriate data sources will help you to prevent and remediate intrusion events. Rate your
We're all used to using various internet services or network services such as DHCP and DNS. Those of us who know more about security and networking, of course, are familiar with those acronyms. What most people aren't familiar with is how people can mess around with those protocols. This is why various governments over the last couple of years keep issuing various notes and various executive orders or whatever about securing fundamental network services such as DHCP and DNS. For example, it is relatively easy, and let me show you here on my Kali Linux system, to set up a particular system called DNS Chef. This makes it possible for me to cook up my own DNS server. This is where I've set up a fake IP address. I've created my own fake government site here on an interface, and I can even forward to a legitimate name server, 8.8.8.8. Look up and see what that name server is. Just giving you an example of how it is possible using pre-baked tools. Now, I didn't have to build this. I didn't have to create it, to start your own fake DNS service very quickly. That's just one example. Another example is of a service is using Metasploit. It is possible to set up my own DHCP server. So there's my rogue DHCP server. We've heard of that term before, the idea of the rogue DHCP server. Well, here it is. And so I can set my own IP address range or what have you. Even more so, what I can do is I can do some DHCP starvation using various tools, such as there's a script out there on the internet called pig.py. It basically hogs up, as it were, all of the DHCP addresses on a particular subnet. The idea being that you can do effectively a denial of service attack on those particular systems. The idea, and so as a result, legitimate users can't have access to the DHCP server, and you could even put your own DHCP server in there that might help you to do various types of attacks and cause confusion on the network. So to secure these types of systems, there are various things that we can do. First of all, we can enable some form of authentication and encryption. With IPv6, you have authentication headers and ESP and things like this that allow you to go about authenticating your packets, authenticating your servers, so that's much more difficult for spoofing to occur. Other things besides enhanced authentication and enhanced encryption, it also includes the ability to monitor these servers more carefully. And monitoring takes two forms: automatic monitoring, which you can do via intrusion detection, but also actual auditing of these services to make sure that your DNS servers don't have caching problems, that the that the DNS caching has not been poisoned, that somebody hasn't gone in and created fake DNS entries on your DNS server. These, and I don't care if that's on the cloud, that server, or if it's on an old installed server somewhere. These things are happening more and more, and that's the nature behind a lot of the alerts that you see issued both in the public and the private sector concerning fundamental network services that need to be secured.
Physical attacks. A physical attack is one directed against cabling infrastructure, hardware devices, or the environment of the site facilities hosting the network. Brute force. A brute force physical attack can take several different forms, some examples of which are the following: smashing a hardware device to perform physical denial of service, DOS. Breaking into premises or cabinets by forcing a lock or gateway. This is likely to be an indicator of theft or tampering. Preventing theft is often impossible to guarantee, so knowing that something has been stolen is important for things like data breach reporting and revoking access permissions. A system that is tamper-evident will display visible signs of forced entry or use that are difficult for a threat actor to disguise. Environmental. An environmental attack could be an attempt to perform denial of service. For example, a threat actor could try to destroy power lines, cut through network cables, or disrupt cooling systems. Alternatively, environmental and building maintenance systems are known vectors for threat actors to try to gain access to company networks. The risk from physical attacks means that premises must be monitored for signs of physical damage or the addition of rogue devices. RFID cloning. Radio Frequency ID, RFID, is a means of encoding information into passive tags. When a reader is within range of the tag, it produces an electromagnetic wave that powers up the tag and allows the reader to collect information from it. This technology can be used to implement contactless building access control systems. RFID cloning and skimming refer to ways of counterfeiting contactless building access cards or badges. Card cloning. This refers to making one or more copies of an existing card. A lost or stolen card with no cryptographic protections can be physically duplicated. Card loss should be reported immediately so that it can be revoked and a new one issued. If there was a successful attack, it might be indicated by use of a card in a suspicious location or time of day. Skimming. This refers to using a counterfeit reader to capture card or badge details, which are then used to program a duplicate. Some types of proximity cards can quite easily be made to transmit the credential to a portable RFID reader that a threat actor could conceal on their person. These attacks can generally only target dumb access cards that transfer static tokens rather than perform crypto processing. If use of the cards is logged, compromise might be indicated by impossible travel and concurrent use access patterns. Near-field communication (NFC) is derived from RFID and is also often used for contactless cards. It works only at very close range and allows two-way communications between NFC peers. Rate your confidence. Network attacks. A network attack is a general category for a number of strategies and techniques that threat actors use to either disrupt or gain access to systems via a network vector. Network attack analysis is usually informed by considering the place each attack type might have within an overall cyber attack lifecycle. Reconnaissance is where a threat actor uses scanning tools to learn about the network. Host discovery identifies which IP addresses are in use. Service discovery identifies which TCP or UDP ports are open on a given host. Fingerprinting identifies the application types and versions of the software operating each port, and potentially of the operating system running on the host, and its device type. Rapid scanning generates a large amount of distinctive network traffic that can be detected and reported as an intrusion event, but it is very difficult to differentiate malicious scanning activity from non-malicious scanning activity. Credential harvesting is a type of reconnaissance where the threat actor attempts to learn passwords or cryptographic secrets that will allow them to obtain authenticated access to network systems. Denial of service, DOS, in a network context refers to attacks that cause hosts and services to become unavailable. This type of attack can be detected by monitoring tools that report when a host or service is not responding or is suffering from abnormally high volumes of requests. A DOS attack might be launched as an end in itself, or to facilitate the success of other types of attacks. Weaponization, delivery, and breach refer to techniques that allow a threat actor to get access without having to authenticate. This typically involves various types of malicious code being directed at a vulnerable application host or service over the network, or sending code concealed in file attachments and tricking a user into running it. Command and control, C2 or CNC. Beaconing and persistence refer to techniques and malicious code that allow a threat actor to operate a compromised host remotely and maintain access to it over a period of time. The threat actor has to disguise the incoming command and outgoing beaconing activity as part of the network's regular traffic, such as by using encrypted HTTPS connections. Detection of this type of activity usually depends on identifying anomalous connection endpoints, such as connections to IP addresses in countries that do not respect copyright or privacy laws. There can also be indicators on the compromised host, such as the malware itself and unauthorized startup items. Lateral movement, pivoting, and privilege escalation refer to techniques that allow the threat actor to move from host to host within a network or from one network segment to another, and to obtain wider and higher permissions for systems and services across the network. These types of attacks are detected via anomalous account logins and privilege use, but detection usually depends on machine learning-backed software, as it is typically difficult to differentiate anomalous behavior from normal behavior. Data exfiltration refers to obtaining an information asset and copying it to the attacker's remote machine. Anomalous large data transfers might be an indicator for exfiltration, but a threat actor could perform the attack stealthily by only moving small amounts of data at any one time. Note that stages in the life cycle are iterative. For example, a threat actor might perform external reconnaissance and credential harvesting or breach to obtain an initial foothold. They might then perform reconnaissance and credential harvesting from the foothold to perform lateral movement and privilege escalation on internal hosts. Rate your distributed denial of service attacks. A denial of service, DOS, Attack is anything that reduces the availability of a resource. DOS attacks can target physical hardware and infrastructure. A malware-based DOS attack might destroy a file system or engineer excessive CPU, memory, storage, or network bandwidth consumption. A DOS attack can also exploit protocol or configuration weaknesses at different network layers. DOS attacks against network hosts and gateways are typically of a type called distributed DOS, DDoS. DDoS means that the attack is launched from multiple hosts simultaneously. Typically, a threat actor will compromise machines to use as handlers in a command and control network. The handlers are used to compromise thousands or millions of hosts with DDoS bot tools, forming a botnet. Some types of DDoS attacks simply aim to consume network bandwidth, denying it to legitimate hosts by using overwhelming numbers of bots making ordinary requests. Others cause resource exhaustion on the victim host by bombarding them with requests, which consume CPU cycles and memory. This delays processing of legitimate traffic and could potentially crash the host system completely. For example, a SYN flood attack works by withholding the client's ACK packet during TCP's three-way handshake. A server, router, or firewall can maintain a queue of pending connections, recorded in its state table. When it does not receive an ACK packet from the client, it resends the SYN/ACK packet a set number of times before timing out the connection. The problem is that a server may only be able to manage a limited number of pending connections, which the DDoS attack quickly fills up. This means that the server is unable to respond to genuine traffic. Reflected attacks. Assembling and managing a botnet large enough to overwhelm a network that has effective DDoS mitigation measures can be a costly endeavor. This has prompted threat actors to devise DDoS techniques that increase the effectiveness of each attack. In a distributed reflected DOS, DRDoS, attack, the threat actor spoofs the victim's IP address and attempts to open connections with multiple third-party servers. Those servers direct their SYN/ACK responses to the victim host. This rapidly consumes the victim's available bandwidth. An asymmetric threat is one where the threat actor is able to perpetrate effective attacks despite having fewer resources than the victim. Amplified attacks. An amplification attack is a type of reflected attack that targets weaknesses in specific application protocols to make the attack more effective at consuming target bandwidth. Amplification attacks exploit protocols that allow the attacker to manipulate the request in such a way that the target is forced to respond with a large amount of data. Protocols commonly targeted include Domain Name System, DNS, Network Time Protocol, NTP, and Connectionless Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, CLDAP. Another example of a particularly effective attack exploits the memcached database caching system used by web servers. DDoS indicators. DDoS attacks can be diagnosed by traffic spikes that have no legitimate explanation, but they can usually only be mitigated by providing high-availability services, such as load balancing and cluster services. In some cases, a stateful firewall can detect a DDoS attack and automatically block the source. However, for many of the techniques used in DDoS attacks, the source addresses will be randomly spoofed or launched by bots, making it difficult to stop the attack at the source. Description. The three tabs on the top read Events, Summary, Selected, and Views. The start and end date and time is listed below. A table titled Top Signatures lists the count, percentage total, hashtag source, hashtag destination, signature, and ID. Tables titled Top Source IPS and Top Destination IPS lists the count, percentage total, hashtag signature, hashtag destination, IP, and country. Dropping traffic from blocklisted IP ranges using Security Onion IDS. Screenshot used with permission from Security Onion. On-path attacks. An on-path attack is where the threat actor gains a position between two hosts and transparently captures, monitors, and relays all communication between them. Because the threat actor relays the intercepted communications, the hosts might not be able to detect the presence of the threat actor. An on-path attack could also be used to covertly modify the traffic. For example, an on-path host could present a workstation with a spoofed website form to try to capture the user credential. This attack is also referred to as an adversary in the middle, 8M attack. On-path attacks can be launched at any network layer. One infamous example attacks the way Layer 2 forwarding works on local segments. The Address Resolution Protocol, ARP, identifies the MAC address of a host on the local segment that owns an IPv4 address. An ARP poisoning attack uses a packet crafter, such as Ettercap, to broadcast unsolicited ARP reply packets. Because ARP has no security mechanism, the receiving devices trust this communication and update their MAC, IP address cache table with a spoofed address. Description: a table at the top lists the number, time, source, destination, protocol, length, and info. In the output below, destination and transmission control protocol are highlighted. Packet capture opened in Wireshark showing ARP poisoning. Screenshot used with permission from wireshark.org. This screenshot shows packets captured during a typical ARP poisoning attack. In frames 6 to 8, the attacking machine, with MAC address ending 4A, directs gratuitous ARP replies at other hosts 76 and 77, claiming to have the IP addresses .2 and .102. This pattern of gratuitous ARP traffic is an indicator of the attack. In frame 9, the .101/77 host tries to send a packet to the .2 host, but it is received by the attacking host with the destination MAC 4A. In frame 10, the attacking host retransmits frame 9 to the actual .2 host. Wireshark colors the frame black and red to highlight the retransmission. In frames 11 and 12, you can see the reply from .2 received by the attacking host in frame 11 and retransmitted to the legitimate host in frame 12. The usual target will be the subnet's default gateway, the router that accesses other networks. If the ARP poisoning attack is successful, all traffic destined for remote networks will be received by the attacker, implementing an on-path attack. Rate your confidence. You must mark your confidence. Domain Name System attacks. The Domain Name System, DNS, resolves requests for named host and services to IP addresses. Name resolution is a critical addressing method on the Internet and on private networks. There are many potential attacks against DNS. On the public Internet, attacks might use typo squatting techniques to cause victims to confuse malicious sites with legitimate ones. DNS can be exploited in a DRDoS attack. Threat actors can also directly target public DNS services as a means of performing DOS against a website or cloud resource. Finally, a threat actor might be able to hijack a public DNS server and insert spoofed records, directing victims to rogue websites. On a private network, a DNS attack is likely to mean some sort of DNS poisoning. DNS poisoning compromises the process by which clients query name servers to locate the IP address for a domain name. There are several ways that a DNS poisoning attack can be perpetrated. DNS-based on-path attacks. If the threat actor has access to the same local network as the victim, the attacker can use ARP poisoning to respond to DNS queries from the victim with spoofed replies. This might be combined with a denial of service attack on the victim's legitimate DNS server. A rogue DHCP could be used to configure clients with the address of a DNS resolver controlled by the threat actor. DNS client cache poisoning. Before DNS was developed in the 1980s, name resolution took place using a text file named hosts. Each name, IP address mapping was recorded in this file, and systems administrators had to download the latest copy and install it on each internet client or server manually. Even though most name resolution now functions through DNS, the host file is still present, and most operating systems check the file before using DNS. Its contents are loaded into a cache of known name, IP mappings, and the client only contacts a DNS server if the name is not cached. Therefore, if an attacker is able to place a false name, IP address mapping in the host's file and effectively poison the DNS cache, they will be able to redirect traffic. The host's file requires administrator access to modify. In Unix and Linux systems, it is stored as /etc/hosts, while in Windows it is placed in %systemroot %system32 /drivers /etc/hosts. The presence of suspect entries in the host's file is an indicator that the machine has been compromised. DNS server cache poisoning. DNS server cache poisoning aims to corrupt the records held by the DNS server itself. This can be accomplished by performing DOS against the server that holds the authorized records for the domain, and then spoofing replies to requests from other name servers. Another attack involves getting the victim name server to respond to a recursive query from the attacking host. A recursive query compels the DNS server to query the authoritative server for the answer on behalf of the client. The attacker's DNS, masquerading as the authoritative name server, responds with the answer to the query, but also includes a lot of false domain, IP mappings for other domains that the victim DNS accepts as genuine. The NSLookup or dig tool can be used to query the name records and cached records held by a server to discover whether any false records have been inserted. DNS attack indicators. A DNS server may log an event each time it handles a request to convert between a domain name and an IP address. DNS event logs can hold a variety of information that may supply useful security intelligence and attack indicators, such as the following. The types of queries a host has made to DNS. Hosts that are in communication with suspicious IP address ranges or domains. Statistical anomalies such as spikes or consistently large numbers of DNS lookup failures, which may point to computers that are infected with malware, misconfigured, or running obsolete or faulty applications. DNS is also a popular choice for implementing command and control (CNC) of remote access Trojans. It can be used as a means of covertly exfiltrating data from a private network. Wireless attacks. Wireless networks present particular security challenges and are frequently the vector for various types of attacks. Rogue access points. A rogue access point is one that has been installed on the network without authorization, whether with malicious intent or not. A malicious user can set up such an access point with something as basic as a smartphone with tethering capabilities, and a non-malicious user could enable such an access point by accident. If connected to a local segment, an unauthorized access point creates a backdoor through which to attack the network. A rogue access point masquerading as a legitimate one is called an evil twin. Each network is identified to users by a service set identifier (SSID) name. An evil twin might use typo squatting or SSID stripping to make the rogue network name appear similar to the legitimate one. Alternatively, the attacker might use some DOS technique to overcome the legitimate access point. In the latter case, they could spoof both the SSID and the basic SSID, BSSID. The BSSID is the MAC address of the access point's radio. The evil twin might be able to harvest authentication information from users entering their credentials by mistake and implement a variety of other on-path attacks, including DNS redirection. Surveying Wi-Fi networks using MetaGeek Insider. The struck guest network shown in the first window is the legitimate one and has WPA2 security configured. The evil twin has the same SSID, but a different BSSID, MAC address, and open authentication. MetaGeek incorporated copyright 2005 to 2023. A rogue hardware access point can be identified through physical inspections. There are also various Wi-Fi analyzers and wireless intrusion protection systems that can detect rogue access points. These can log use of typo squatting SIDs and unknown and duplicate, spoofed MAC addresses. In an enterprise network, access points are usually connected to switches. Monitoring can detect any that are not and flag them as potential rogues. They may also be able to identify radio hardware and alert if an unauthorized access point brand is detected. Wireless denial of service. Wireless DOS can also target clients. Wireless denial of service. A wireless denial of service, DOS, attack is usually designed to prevent clients from connecting to the legitimate access point. A wireless network can be disrupted by interference from other radio sources. These are often unintentional, but it is also possible for an attacker to purposefully jam the legitimate network by setting up a rogue access point with a stronger signal. Wireless DOS can also target clients. In the normal course of operations, an access point and client use management frames to control connections. A disassociation attack exploits the lack of encryption in management frame traffic to send spoofed frames. One type of disassociation attack injects management frames that spoof the MAC address of a single victim station in a disassociation notification, causing it to be disconnected from the network. Another variant of the attack broadcasts spoofed frames to disconnect all stations. As well as trying to redirect connections to an evil twin, a disassociation attack might also be used in conjunction with a replay attack aimed at recovering the network key. Wireless replay and key recovery. Wireless authentication is vulnerable to various types of replay attacks that aim to capture the hashes used when a wireless station associates with an access point. Once the hash is captured, it can be subjected to offline brute force and dictionary cracking. A crack attack uses a replay mechanism that targets the WPA and WPA2 four-way handshake. Crack is effective regardless of whether the authentication mechanism is personal or enterprise. It is important to ensure both clients and access points are fully patched against such attacks. Rate your password attacks. When a user chooses a password, the plaintext value is converted to a cryptographic hash. This means that, in theory, no one except the user, not even the system's administrator, knows the password because the plaintext should not be recoverable from the hash. A password attack aims to exploit the weaknesses inherent in password selection and management to recover the plaintext and use it to compromise an account. Online attacks. An online password attack is where the threat actor interacts with the authentication service directly, a web login form or VPN gateway, for instance. An online password attack can show up in audit logs as repeatedly failed logins and then a successful login, or as successful login attempts at unusual times or locations. Apart from ensuring the use of strong passwords by users, online password attacks can be mitigated by restricting the number or rate of login attempts and by shunning login attempts from known bad IP addresses. Note that restricting logins can be turned into a vulnerability as it exposes the account to denial of service attacks. The attacker keeps trying to authenticate, locking out valid users. Offline attacks. An offline attack means that the attacker has managed to obtain a database of password hashes, such as %systemroot%/32\config\sam, %systemroot%/ntds /ntds-dit, the Active Directory credential store, or /etc/shadow. Once the password database has been obtained, the cracker does not interact with the authentication system. The only indicator of this type of attack, other than misuse of the account in the event of a successful attack, is a file system audit log that records the malicious account accessing one of these files. Threat actors can also read credentials from host memory, in which case the only reliable indicator might be the presence of attack tools on a host. If the attacker cannot obtain a database of passwords, a packet sniffer might be used to obtain the client response to a server challenge in an authentication protocol. Some protocols send the hash directly. Others use the hash to derive an encryption key. Weaknesses in protocols using derived keys can allow for the extraction of the hash for cracking. Brute force attacks. A brute force attack attempts every possible combination in the output space to try to match a captured hash and derive the plaintext that generated it. The output space is determined by the number of bits used by the algorithm, 128-bit MD5 or 256-bit ESTJ256, for instance. The larger the output space and the more characters that were used in the plaintext password, the more difficult it is to compute and test each possible hash to find a match. Brute force attacks are heavily constrained by time and computing resources and are therefore most effective at cracking short passwords. However, brute force attacks distributed across multiple hardware components, like a cluster of high-end graphics cards, can be successful at cracking longer passwords. Dictionary and hybrid attacks. A dictionary attack can be used where there is a good chance of guessing the likely value of the plaintext, such as a non-complex password. The software generates hash values from a dictionary of plaintext to try to match one to a captured hash. A hybrid password attack uses a combination of dictionary and brute force attacks. It is principally targeted against naive passwords with inadequate complexity, such as James 1. The password cracking algorithm tests dictionary words and names in combination with a mask that limits the number of variations to test for, such as adding numeric prefixes and/or suffixes. Password spraying. Password spraying is a horizontal brute force online attack. This means that the attacker chooses one or more common passwords, for example, password or 123456, and tries them in conjunction with multiple usernames. Rate your
We've been using passwords for a long time, and I think we're going to continue using passwords for all of the talk of multi-factor authentication or passwordless authentication. They're still going to be in our lives, and there are various attacks that we can talk about that make it possible to obtain a password improperly, let's put it that way. The two major methods here are dictionary attacks and brute force attacks. Let me explain what those are real quick. In a brute force attack, it's the idea that you use a computer or anything else really to repeatedly guess randomly a password. So you'll basically say, well, is the password password 123? Oh, didn't work. Is it P ampersand a SSWORD 1? Is it PASSWORD 1-2, and you just incrementally start throwing random information at that login to get that password or to a file to crack that password. With dictionary attacks, they can be effective, but they can take many years to get at them. So what you can start doing is do educated guesses, and you can do what's called a dictionary attack. It's very related. But with a dictionary attack, what you're doing is instead of incrementing, by one letter, and trying to do it that way, you're basically consulting an actual file. So let me show you something here real quick. You're actually using words, and you're actually using words in a list. So in this case, I've got a directory open here, and I've got a very simple dictionary file here. Very simple in the sense that you can see I've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 passwords going on here. Very simple. There's another one that I have that is not an incredible list by any stretch of the imagination, but it basically has millions of different guesses for passwords. See, this is what happens is when an account gets hacked, a lot of times somebody will get a hold of all those passwords and sell them to somebody. They end up on the dark web or wherever they end up. People will add those passwords to their dictionary lists. And that makes it much easier to guess the password. And something that would take weeks and months, years to guess could turn into days or hours even to guess because you're using a dictionary password. Now, what I'm talking about here, again, are specific attacks. This is not cryptanalysis. Cryptanalysis is where you take a look at the actual code of an algorithm, AES, for example, and you review that code and you look for some sort of problem, or you look for something called like side channel attacks. I'm not talking about cryptanalysis. I'm talking about the idea of going in there and identifying a particular implementation of a password to see if you can somehow defeat that key, get a hold of that key. So let me show you a couple of common tools that are out there. One of them is very popular. It's called John the Ripper. Quite the name there. And John the Ripper's been around for decades. And with John the Ripper, it can do brute force attack, or you can set it to use a word list. In other words, do a dictionary attack. In this case, that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to run it against the shadow file that I got a hold of. And let me show you what this shadow file looks like real quick here. In this shadow file, you can see, interestingly enough, the root account does not have a password associated with it. Neither do most of these. But if you scroll on down here, you've got this username James. And there's the hash right there. And that there, let's see, it's 512. Yeah, this hash is the password. But I can't just type that in and reuse it. You actually have to find some way to decrypt that password. Well, again, you have two common solutions dictionary file, or you go after a particular command. So in this case, what I'm going to do is use John the Ripper to conduct an attack. So with this command, I'm using the John the Ripper here. It's just known as John. And I'm specifying a word list. And in this case, I'm specifying a very simple dictionary file. It just has 5-6 passwords in it. And I'm going to go after that shadow file. And it's going to go in and read that word list as it goes to see what it can find. Okay. Now, in this case, what it's saying is that it says it's loaded one password hash here. It's SHA 512, which is standard hash for a Linux system these days. And let's see, and looky here, it looks like it may have found something. And in fact, it has. In this case, what it did is it said for the username James, so I'm highlighting James right there, that's the user. Looky there, it said parrot. And believe it or not, that's the password that I've been using for this particular system. It's just parrot. So it discovered that particular password. So that is a very simple example of a dictionary file, and I could have dictionary attack, and I could have specified another dictionary attack. There's another example I'd like to show you. In this case, I'm using an application called Hydra. DHC Hydra, been around for years as well. In this case, I know the username. Now think about this. If you're looking to defeat a particular password-based form of authentication, pretty easy to get a hold of somebody's username. Send them an email, right? Or receive an email or discover it. Pretty easy because a lot of emails will give the name, are based on the name of the actual account that is used in a Windows domain, for example. So in this case, I know the username. It's James. But you could type anything else in there you wanted to. If you're after the root account, you could type in root or whoever's name or whatever account name. In this case, I'm telling it to look for a particular password file, dictionaryfile.txt. -VV puts it in verbose mode because I like to see what it's doing, how it's working, want you to see it. And then I'm telling it to go after an SSH server, a secure shell server, that I happen to know only does authentication via passwords, not public and private keys like it should. In this case, that's the remote IP address. So I'm going to hit enter, and it, let me scroll back up here so you can see it. Verbose mode gets pretty verbose. So I start the account here. There's Hydra version 9, and it's basically saying that it started at a specific time. And it's basically saying I'm going to be as stealthy as possible, although this is very obvious stuff. Any good intrusion detection system would discover this particular attack. So it's attacking this secure shell server at this IP address, 192.168.224.6. And it's now going through there and saying, well, okay, I've got that dictionary password, and there's the login James, and here's one password, and we'll try this one, and we'll try this one, and we'll try this one. You get the idea. It's going through there. And it has reported, and this line is the important one. Let's see if I can actually do it correctly. This basically has identified that this remote system has a username James that is using Ubuntu 123. Well, it just happened to be one of those that's in the dictionary file. Now, again, this is very hello world, very simple. But imagine if somebody has a resource that is just using password protection. If you have a good enough dictionary file, you can go a long ways and you can discover that. I'm not encouraging you to do that, but I'm just showing you an example of how hackers are able to defeat passwords.
Credential replay attacks. A threat actor might establish a foothold on the network by compromising a single workstation via malware or a password attack. Once an initial foothold has been gained, the threat actor's objective is likely to be to identify data assets. For this, they need to find ways to perform lateral movement to compromise other hosts on the network and privilege escalation to gain more permissions over network assets. To accomplish these objectives, as well as cracking more passwords or finding more vulnerabilities, they can use credential replay attacks. In terms of network attacks, credential replay attacks mostly target Windows Active Directory networks. There are also credential replay attacks that target web applications. We will discuss these in the next topic. If a user account on a Windows host has authenticated to an Active Directory domain network, the Local Security Authority Subsystem Service, LSAS, caches various secrets in memory and in the Security Account Manager, SAM, registry database to facilitate single sign-on. These secrets include the following: Kerberos Ticket Granting Ticket, TGT, and Session Key. This allows the host to request service tickets to access applications. Service tickets for applications where the user has started a session. NT hash of local and domain user and service accounts that are currently signed in, whether interactively or remotely, over the network. Early Windows business networks used NT LAN Manager, NTLM, challenge, and response authentication. While the NTLM protocol is deprecated for most uses, the NT hash is still used as the credential storage format. The NT hash is used where legacy NTLM authentication is still allowed and can be involved in signing Kerberos requests and responses. Critical for network security. If different users are signed in on the same host, secrets for all these accounts could be cached by LSAS. If some of these accounts are for more privileged users, such as domain administrators, a threat actor might be able to use the secrets to escalate privileges. LSAS purges hashes from memory within a few minutes of the user signing out. The SAM database caches local and Microsoft account credentials, but not domain credentials. Some editions of Windows implement a virtualization feature called Credential Guard to protect these secrets from malicious processes, even if they have system permissions. Credential replay attacks use various mechanisms to obtain and exploit these locally stored secrets to start authenticated sessions on other hosts and applications on the network. For example, if a threat actor can obtain an NT hash, they can use a pass the hash, PTH, attack to start a session on another host if that host is running a service such as file sharing or remote desktop that still allows NTLM authentication.
Description.
The process involves 4 steps as follows. 1. Victim logs on. DC verifies user with Kerberos. 2. Victim logs on again. Kerberos credentials cached in SAM. 3. Attacker dumps SAM on victim's computer. Hashed credentials revealed. 4. Attacker uses hash on other computer. Hashed credentials recognized by Kerberos. The pass the hash process. The Security Accounts Manager, SAM, is a Windows registry database that stores local account credentials. Images copyright 123rf.com. Legacy and TLM authentication is often disabled as it is such a high security risk. Other types of credential replay are directed against Kerberos authentication and authorization. For example, a golden ticket attack attempts to forge a ticket granting ticket. If successful, this gives the threat actor effectively unrestricted access to all domain resources. A silver ticket attack attempts to forge service tickets. These can be described as pass the ticket, PTT, attacks. Microsoft has released a number of mitigations against these specific credential replay attacks. Ensuring hosts are fully patched and use secure configuration baselines greatly reduces their effectiveness. Where they remain a risk, a detection system can be configured to correlate a sequence of security log events, but this method can be prone to false positives. Antivirus and host-based intrusion detection can often detect the malware code used to dump credentials or launch ticket forgery attacks. Rate your confidence.
Continue. Category.
Top Cryptographic attacks. Attacks that target authentication systems often depend on the system, using weak cryptography. Downgrade attacks. A downgrade attack makes a server or a client use a lower specification protocol with weaker ciphers and key lengths. For example, a combination of an on-path and downgrade attack on HTTPS might try to force the client to use a weak version of Transport Layer Security, TLS, or even downgrade to the Legacy Secure Sockets Layer, SSL, protocol. This makes it easier for a threat actor to force the use of weak cipher suites and forge the signature of a certificate authority that the client trusts. A type of downgrade attack is used to attack Active Directory. A Kerberosing attack attempts to discover the passwords that protect service accounts by obtaining service tickets and subjecting them to brute force password cracking attacks. If the credential portion of the service ticket is encrypted using AES, it is very hard to brute force. If the attack is able to cause the server to return the ticket using weak RC for encryption, a cracker is more likely to be able to extract the service password. Evidence of downgrade attacks is likely to be found in server logs or by intrusion detection systems. Collision attacks. A collision is where a weak cryptographic hashing function or implementation allows the generation of the same digest value for two different plaintexts. A collision attack exploits this vulnerability to forge a digital signature. The attack works as follows. The attacker creates a malicious document and a benign document that produce the same hash value. The attacker submits the benign document for signing by the target. The attacker then removes the signature from the benign document and adds it to the malicious document, forging the target's signature. A collision attack could be used to forge a digital certificate to spoof a trusted website or to make it appear as though Trojan malware derived from a trusted publisher. Birthday attacks. A collision attack depends on being able to create a malicious document that outputs the same hash as the benign document. Some collision attacks depend on being able to manipulate the way the hash is generated. A birthday attack is a means of exploiting collisions in hash functions through brute force. Brute force means attempting every possible combination until a successful one is achieved. The attack is named after the birthday paradox. This paradox shows that the computational time required to brute force a collision might be less than expected. The birthday paradox asks how large must a group of people be so that the chance of two of them sharing a birthday is 50%. The answer is 23, but people who are not aware of the paradox often answer around 180, 365/2. The point is that the chances of someone sharing a particular birthday are small, but the chances of any two people in a group sharing any birth date in a calendar year get better and better as you add more people. 1. 365 asterisk 365 minus 1 asterisk 365 to 2 asterisk 365 n minus 1 slash 365n. To exploit the paradox, the attacker creates multiple malicious and benign documents, both featuring minor changes, punctuation, extra spaces, and so on. Depending on the length of the hash and the limits to the non-suspicious changes that can be introduced, if the attacker can generate sufficient variations, then the chance of matching hash outputs can be better than 50%. This effectively means that a hash function that outputs 128-bit hashes can be attacked by a mechanism that can generate 264 variations. Computing 264 variations will take much less time than computing 128 variations. Attacks that exploit collisions are difficult to launch, but the principle behind the attack informs the need to use authentication methods that use both strong ciphers and strong protocol and software implementations. Rate your confidence. Malicious code indicators. Many network attacks are launched by compromised hosts running various types of malicious code. Indicators of malicious code execution are either caught by endpoint protection software or discovered after the fact in logs of how the malware interacted with the network, file system, and registry. To understand how and where these indicators are generated, it is helpful to consider the main types of malicious activity. Shellcode. This is a minimal program designed to exploit a vulnerability in the OS or in a legitimate app to gain privileges, or to drop a backdoor on the host if run as a Trojan. Having gained a foothold, this type of attack will be followed by some type of network connection to download additional tools. Credential dumping. The malware might try to access the credentials file, SAM on a local Windows workstation, or sniff credentials held in memory by the LSAS, exe system process. Additionally, a DCSing attack attempts to trick a domain controller into replicating its user list along with their credentials with a rogue host. Pivoting/lateral movement/insider attack. The general procedure is to use the foothold to execute a process remotely, using a tool such as psexec or PowerShell. The attacker might be seeking data assets or may try to widen access by changing the system's security configuration, such as opening a firewall port or creating an account. If the attacker has compromised an account, these commands can blend in with ordinary network operations. though they could be anomalous behavior for that account. Persistence. This is a mechanism that allows the threat actor's backdoor to restart if the host reboots or the user logs off. Typical methods are to use auto-run keys in the registry, adding a scheduled task, or using Windows Management Instrumentation, WMI, event subscriptions. Rate your confidence. Exam objectives covered. 2.4 Given a scenario, analyze indicators of malicious activity. A web application exposes many interfaces to public networks. Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in server software and in client browser security to perform injection and session hijacking attacks that compromise data confidentiality and integrity. Understanding how these attacks are perpetrated and being able to diagnose their indicators from appropriate data sources will help you to prevent and remediate intrusion events. Rate your confidence.
Continue. Category.
Topic 13C. Application attack indicators. Report content errors. Copyright CompTia Incorporated. All rights reserved. Terms of use privacy statement trademarks. Welcome to CERT Master Learn for Security Plus. Welcome to CERT Master Learn for Security Plus. Using CERT Master Learn. Using CERT Master Learn. Lesson 1. Introduction and Objectives. Lesson Application attacks. An application attack targets a vulnerability in OS or application software. An application vulnerability is a design flaw that can cause the application security system to be circumvented or that will cause the application to crash. There are broadly two main scenarios for application attacks. Compromising the operating system or third-party apps on a network host by exploiting Trojans, malicious attachments, or browser vulnerabilities. This allows the threat actor to obtain a foothold on a local network. Compromising the security of a website or web application. This allows a threat actor to gain control of a web host and either steal data from it or use it to try to penetrate further into the network. Increased numbers of application crashes and errors might provide a general indicator that a threat actor is attempting to exploit a vulnerability in a network service, desktop OS or app, or web application. Errors might be recorded in a system log or application-specific log, depending on the nature of the software and the type of fault event. Anomalous CPU, memory, storage, or network utilization can also be an indicator of application attack. These indicators can also have multiple non-malicious causes, however, so it is important to correlate them to factors that identify specific types of application attacks. Privilege escalation. The purpose of most application attacks is to allow the threat actor to run their own code on the system. This is referred to as arbitrary code execution. Where the code is transmitted from one machine to another, it can be referred to as remote code execution. The code would typically be designed to install some sort of backdoor or to disable the system in some way. An application or process must have privileges to read and write data and execute functions. Depending on how the software is written, a process may run using a system account, the account of the logged-on user, or a nominated account. If a software exploit works, the attacker may be able to execute arbitrary code with the same privilege level as the exploited process. There are two main types of privilege escalation. Vertical privilege escalation, or elevation, is where a user or application can access functionality or data that should not be available to them. For instance, a process might run with local administrator privileges, but a vulnerability allows the arbitrary code to run with higher system privileges. Horizontal privilege escalation is where a user accesses functionality or data that is intended for another user. For instance, via a process running with local administrator privileges on a client workstation, the arbitrary code is able to execute as a domain account on an application server. Without performing detailed analysis of code or process execution in real time, it is privilege escalation that provides the simplest indicator of an application attack. If process logging has been configured, the audit log can provide evidence of privilege escalation attempts. These attempts may also be detected by incident response and endpoint protection agents, which will display an alert. Buffer overflow. Buffer overflow. A buffer is an area of memory that an application reserves to store some value. The application will expect the data to conform to some expected value size or format. To exploit a buffer overflow vulnerability, the attacker passes data that deliberately fills the buffer to its end and then overwrites data at its start. One of the most common vulnerabilities is a stack overflow. The stack is an area of memory used by a program subroutine. It includes a return address, which is the location of the program that called the subroutine. An attacker could use a buffer overflow to change the return address, allowing the attacker to run arbitrary code on the system. Operating systems use mechanisms such as address space layout randomization, ASLR, and data execution prevention, DEP, to mitigate risks from buffer overflow. Failed attempts at buffer overflow can be identified through frequent process crashes and other anomalies. Replay attacks. In the context of a web application, a replay attack most often means exploiting cookie-based sessions. HTTP is nominally a stateless protocol, meaning that the server preserves no information about the client. To overcome this limitation, mechanisms such as cookies have been developed to preserve stateful data. A cookie is created when the server sends an HTTP response header with the cookie data. A cookie has a name and value, plus optional security and expiry attributes. Subsequent request headers sent by the client will usually include the cookie. Cookies are either non-persistent cookies, in which case they're stored in memory and deleted when the browser instance is closed, or persistent, in which case they're stored in the browser cache until deleted by the user or pass a defined expiration date. Session management enables a web application to uniquely identify a user across a number of different actions and requests. A session token identifies the user and may also be used to prove that the user has been authenticated. A replay attack works by capturing or guessing the token value and then submitting it to reestablish the session illegitimately. Description. The list of folders on the left is titled Hooked Browsers. The current browser tab followed by the Commands tab is selected on the right. The section is divided into 3 vertical parts titled Module Tree, Module Results History, and Command Results. Get Cookie option is selected under the head module tree, and the module tree history lists the date and label. Using the Browser Exploitation Framework, BEEF, to obtain the session cookie from a browser. Attackers can capture cookies by sniffing network traffic via an on-path attack, or when they're sent over an unsecured network, like a public Wi-Fi hotspot. Malware infecting a host is also likely to be able to capture cookies. Session cookies can also be compromised via cross-site scripting, XSS. Cross-site scripting, XSS, is an attack technique that runs malicious code in a browser in the context of a trusted site or application. Session prediction attacks focus on identifying possible weaknesses in the generation of tokens that will enable an attacker to anticipate values that will establish sessions in the future. A session token must be generated using a non-predictable algorithm, and it must not reveal any information about the session client. In addition, proper session management dictates that apps limit the lifespan of a session and require re-authentication after a certain period. Rate your content. Forgery attacks. In contrast with replay attacks, a forgery attack hijacks an authenticated session to perform some action without the user's consent. Cross-site request forgery. A cross-site request forgery, CSRF, can exploit applications that use cookies to authenticate users and track sessions. To work, the threat actor must convince the victim to start a session with the target site. The attacker must then pass an HTTP request to the victim's browser that spoofs an action on the target site, such as changing a password or an email address. This request could be disguised in ways that accomplish the attack, without the victim necessarily having to click a link. If the target site assumes that the browser is authenticated because there is a valid session cookie and doesn't complete any additional authorization process on the attacker's input, it will accept the request as genuine. This is also referred to as a confused deputy attack.
Description.
The steps are as follows. 1. Alice signs in at a trusted site. 2. Mallory sends Alice a malicious link. 3. Alice trusts the link and clicks it while still logged into the trusted site. 4. The link makes a malicious request on the site. Cross-site request forgery example. Images copyright 123rf.com. Server-side request forgery. A server-side request forgery, SSRF, causes a server application to process an arbitrary request that targets another service. The target service could be another application running on the same host or a service running on a remote host. SSRF exploits both the lack of authentication between the internal servers and services. It also relies on weak input validation, which allows the attacker to submit arbitrary requests. SSRF attacks are often targeted against cloud infrastructure where the web server is only the public-facing component of a deeper processing chain. A typical web application comprises multiple layers of servers, with a client interface, middleware logic layers, and a database layer. Requests initiated from the client interface, a web form, are likely to require multiple requests and responses between the middleware and backend servers. These will be implemented as HTTP header requests and responses between each server. SSRF is a means of accessing these internal servers by causing the public server to execute requests on them. While with CSRF, an exploit only has the privileges of the client, with SSRF, the manipulated request is made with the server's privilege level.
Description.
The steps are as follows. 1. Mallory cannot access the database server directly. 2. Mallory crafts a malicious request and submits it to the front-end server. 3. The web server performs the malicious request. 4. The database server accepts the request because it appears to come from the web server. 5. Mallory may also get information from the internal server. Server-side request forgery example. Images copyright 123rf.com. Rate your confidence.
Continue. Category.
Topic. Injection attacks. Attacks such as session replay, CSRF, and most types of XSS are client-side attacks. This means that they execute arbitrary code on the browser. A server-side attack causes the server to do some processing or run a script or query in a way that is not authorized by the application design. Most server-side attacks depend on some kind of injection attack. An injection attack exploits some unsecure way in which the application processes requests and queries. For example, an application might allow a user to view their profile with a database query that should return the single record for that one user's profile. An application vulnerable to an injection attack might allow a threat actor to return the records for all users, or to change fields in the record when they are only supposed to be able to read them. The persistent XSS and abuse of SQL queries and parameters discussed earlier in the course are both types of injection attack. There are a number of other injection attack types that pose serious threats to web applications and infrastructure. Extensible markup language injection. Extensible markup language, XML, is used by apps for authentication and authorizations and for other types of data exchange and uploading. Data submitted via XML with no encryption or input validation is vulnerable to spoofing, request forgery, and injection of arbitrary data or code. For example, an XML external entity, XXE, attack embeds a request for a local resource. XML version equals 1.0, encoding equals UTF. 8. Duck type foo, element foo any, entity bar system file : // etc. / config. Bar and bar, /bar. This defines an entity named bar that refers to a local file path. A successful attack will return the contents of / etc. / config as part of the response. Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, LDAP, injection. The Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, LDAP, is another example of a query language. LDAP is specifically used to read and write network directory databases. A threat actor could exploit either unauthenticated access or a vulnerability in a client app to submit arbitrary LDAP queries. This could allow accounts to be created or deleted, or for the attacker to change authorizations and privileges. LDAP filters are constructed from name equals value, attribute pairs delimited by parentheses, and the logical operators and or. Adding filter parameters as unsanitized input can bypass access controls. For example, if a web form authenticates to an LDAP directory with a valid credentials Bob and $$W0RD, it may construct a query, such as this from the user input. And username equals Bob, password equals $$W0RD. Both parameters must be true for the login to be accepted. If the form input is not sanitized, a threat actor could bypass the password check by entering a valid username plus an LDAP filter string, such as Bob, and. This causes the password filter to be dropped for a condition that is always true. And username equals Bob. Directory traversal and command injection attacks. Directory traversal is another type of injection attack performed against a web server. The threat actor submits a request for a file outside the web server's root directory by submitting a path to navigate to the parent directory, /. This attack can succeed if the input is not filtered properly and access permissions on the file allow the web server's process to read, write, or execute it. The threat actor might use a canonicalization attack to disguise the nature of the malicious input. Canonicalization refers to the way the server converts between the different methods by which a resource may be represented and submitted to the simplest, or canonical, method used by the server to process the input. Examples of encoding schemes include HTML entities and character set % encoding. An attacker might be able to exploit vulnerabilities in a canonicalization process to perform code injection or facilitate directory traversal. For example, to perform a directory traversal attack, the attacker might submit a URL such as the following: http://victim.foo/?show / etc/config. A limited input validation routine would prevent the use of the string / and refuse the request. If the attacker submitted the URL using the encoded version of the characters, they might be able to circumvent the validation routine. http://victim foo/?show $%2 e%2 e%2 f%2 e%2 e%2 f%2 e%2 e%2 f%2 e%2 e%2 fetc/config. A command injection attack attempts to cause the server to run OS shell commands and return the output to the browser. As with directory traversal, the web server should normally be able to prevent commands from operating outside of the server's directory root and to prevent commands from running with any privilege level other than the web server's guest user, which is normally granted only very restricted privileges. A successful command injection attack would find some way of circumventing this security or exploit a web server that is not properly configured. Rate your URL analysis. Session hijacking/replay, forgery, and injection attacks are difficult to identify, but the starting points for detection are likely to be URL analysis and the web server's access log. Uniform resource locator analysis, as well as pointing to the host or service location on the internet by domain name or IP address. A uniform resource locator, URL, can encode some action or data to submit to the server host. This is a common vector for malicious activity.
Description.
http://trusted. Foo/ is the URL for a trusted domain with a vulnerable script. Upload.php?post equal to is the query. %3 script %3d %27 http %3 a %2f %2f is the encoding. Zixbud foo %2 frat %2 ejs %27 %3 e %3 c/ Script %3e is the obfuscated domain hosting malicious script. Uniform Resource Locator, URL Analysis. As part of URL analysis, it is important to understand how HTTP operates. An HTTP session starts with a client, a user agent, such as a web browser, making a request to an HTTP server. The connection establishes a TCP connection. This TCP connection can be used for multiple requests, or a client can start new TCP connections for different requests. A request typically comprises a method, a resource, such as a URL path, version number, headers, and body. The principal methods are the following: get, retrieve a resource; post, send data to the server for processing by the requested resource; put, create or replace the resource. Data can be submitted to a server either by using a post or put method and the HTTP headers and body, or by encoding the data within the URL used to access the resource. Data submitted via a URL is delimited by the character, which follows the resource path. Query parameters are usually formatted as one or more name equals value pairs, with ampersands delimiting each pair. The server response comprises the version number and a status code and message, plus optional headers and message body. An HTTP response code is the header value returned by a server when a client requests a URL, such as 204 OK or 444 not found. Percent encoding. A URL can contain only unreserved and reserved characters from the standard set. Reserved characters are used as delimiters within the URL syntax and should only be used unencoded for those purposes. The reserved characters are the following: slash, hashtag, at, dollar and, asterisk plus, equals. There are also unsafe characters, which cannot be used in a URL. Control characters, such as null string termination, carriage return, line feed, end of file, and tab, are unsafe. Percent encoding allows a user agent to submit any safe or unsafe character, or binary data, to the server within the URL. Its legitimate uses are to encode reserved characters within the URL when they are not part of the URL syntax, and to submit Unicode characters. Percent encoding can be misused to obfuscate the nature of a URL, encoding unreserved characters, and submit malicious input. Web server logs. Web servers are typically configured to log HTTP traffic that encounters an error or traffic that matches some predefined rule set. This can preserve indicators of attempted and successful replay, forgery, and injection attacks. The status code of a response can reveal quite a bit about both the request and the server's behavior. Codes in the 400 range indicate client-based errors, while codes in the 500 range indicate server-based errors. For example, repeated 403, forbidden, responses may indicate that the server is rejecting a client's attempts to access resources they are not authorized to. A 502, bad gateway, response could indicate that communications between the target server and its upstream server are being blocked, or that the upstream server is down. In addition to status codes, some web server software also logs HTTP header information for both requests and responses. This can provide a detailed picture of the makeup of each request or response, such as cookie information. Web server access log showing an ordinary client, 203.0.113.66, accessing a page and its associated image resources, and then scanning activity from the Nikto app running on 203.0.113.66. You should be able to identify the indicators of malware, physical, network, cryptographic, password, and application attack types. Guidelines for implementing indicator analysis. Follow these guidelines to support analysis of different attack types. Consider implementing behavior-based endpoint protection suites that can perform more effective detection of fileless malware. Consider setting up a sandbox with analysis tools to investigate suspicious process behavior. Consider using threat data feeds to assist with identification of documented and published indicators. Implement inspection audits and site logging to identify brute force, environmental, and RFID cloning physical attacks. Prepare playbooks and threat intelligence to assist with attack analysis. Resource consumption, file system anomalies, resource inaccessibility, and missing/out-of-cycle logging indicators of system compromise. Lockout, concurrent session, and impossible travel indicators of account compromise. Characteristics of bloatware, virus, worm, Trojan, spyware, keylogger, ransomware, and logic bomb malware types. Network appliance resource consumption indicators of DDoS, including reflected and amplified types. Network monitoring and log indicators of on-path, DNS, wireless, credential replay, cryptographic downgrade, password spraying, and brute force password attacks. Host monitoring and logging indicators of injection, buffer overflow, replay, privilege escalation, forgery, and directory traversal application attacks. Rate your confidence.